This past Christmas was a busy time, and I had to start buying presents for my family. I had finished all my shopping except for one last gift for my 4-year-old little cousin. She wasn't difficult to shop for. She loved things like Peppa Pig and My Little Pony, and she especially liked, or I should say, liked Max and Ruby. With that in mind, I decided to look for a Max and Ruby DVD, which I thought would be the perfect gift since she watched it daily. However, because of the Christmas rush, most online DVDs were sold out everywhere. I checked eBay but didn't trust the condition the DVDs would be in, so I was stuck for a while. Then a package arrived. I was still scrolling online for the DVD when I heard the sound of something being pushed through my letterbox. I grabbed it before my dog could and looked at the package. It was wrapped very poorly and had what looked like grease marks and stains on it. Naturally, I decided to open it. Inside was a Max and Ruby DVD, but it was unlike anything I had seen online. It looked like a kid had drawn on the front cover with a marker. The title was simply Max and Ruby, with a poorly drawn illustration of the two characters. There were no names or anything, but on the back there was a list of 4 episodes, each with the blunt title Episode 1, Episode 2, Episode 3, Episode 4. I decided to watch the DVD, and to my surprise, the episodes were perfect quality and seemed to have no flaws. It was as if it was a real DVD, just with a homemade cover. The only thing I found odd was the episode selection screen. The episodes had names, but they were all called Max and Ruby 1, with the number changing as the list went down. The screen itself was just plain white, with black text, and the episode list. After thinking it over, I decided to change the cover to something nicer by printing a cover I found on Google and labeling the episodes with their correct names, which I also looked up. I left the episode selection screen alone since it was self-explanatory. Christmas passed, and everything was fine. I gave the DVD to my little cousin, and she was happy with it throughout the holiday, but only because she hadn't watched it yet. On Boxing Day, the family went out for a meal, leaving me to babysit my cousin. I didn't mind being home alone and figured it was a good time to put the DVD on for her. I put it in and let it play while I was in the kitchen eating my dinner. From what I could hear, she had watched episodes 1, 2, and 3. I was about to finish my noodles when I heard my cousin screaming from the other room. Dropping everything, I ran into the living room and saw her curled up on the floor, screaming. I looked up at the TV, and my heart jumped into my throat. What I saw was the most disturbing thing I had ever witnessed. It was a single frame of Max and Ruby standing next to each other in complete darkness. What made it so horrible was their lack of faces. Their noses and mouths were gone, and their eyes were replaced with big, hollow holes. The colors were a disgusting blood red, and there was a faint static in the background. The sound was replaced with the Max and Ruby theme song playing backward, with a faint static sound mixed in. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever seen, and it was on screen for at least 20 seconds before the screen went black and the DVD turned off, which was weird in itself because DVDs don't usually turn off by themselves. I was able to calm my cousin down, telling her it wasn't real and that she had just had a nightmare as she had fallen asleep in front of the DVD. However, in my mind, I knew it was completely real. My parents called and told me they would be out all night, which was the perfect opportunity to look at the DVD more closely. I didn't mention it to them, and as soon as they hung up, I grabbed the DVD and put it into my laptop. As soon as it loaded, I noticed that episode 4 had been replaced with R.I.P. Mommy and Daddy, which sent a deep chill down my back. Since my cousin was asleep, I plugged in my earbuds so she wouldn't hear anything. Normally, an episode of Max and Ruby would have 3 short stories, but this episode only had 1. It started off quite lighthearted. Max and Ruby were playing tag in the garden, and their parents were on the porch watching them. However, something was off. The sound was playing in reverse, and the parents' faces looked sad. A film grain appeared, which grew worse every second. The camera panned to the mother and father, and in a deep voice of sorrow, the father sighed. "It's such a shame." Then there was a short sound of static, followed by a loud scream and the sound of 2 people choking, while the mother and father mumbled to each other in the background. Though it was impossible to understand what they were saying, the sounds were so realistic it almost made me physically sick. The screen cut to white for a split second, then transitioned to a scene showing Max and Ruby standing in front of what looked like a gravestone, labeled R.I.P. Mommy and Daddy. The 2 of them had no faces at this point. There was no sound other than faint static. The scene stayed on the screen for about 1.5 minutes before cutting to black. It then changed scenes again, showing Max and Ruby sitting in Ruby's room, while undecipherable whispering became apparent and grew louder over time. Both of them were sobbing uncontrollably, while transparent clips of a murder, playing in reverse, flashed on the screen. The father pulled a knife out of his neck, picked up a bloody axe, and hacked away at the mother's corpse before she came back to life. And he walked up the stairs. At this point, the whispering became louder, and more of the whispering voices started to disappear. The very last voice was that of a very angry woman, who screamed, "Burn in hell!" I was absolutely terrified. The scene then changed to the most disgusting yet saddest thing I had ever witnessed. It showed Max sitting in his room, standing on a chair with a noose hanging from the ceiling. He had put it around his neck. The scene faded to black, and the static got louder almost instantly. It then cut to Ruby walking in on her brother. She let out a gut-wrenching scream. The camera panned on her face as the sound of the chair being kicked, and the same joking from before began to play. The picture of Ruby's face stayed on the screen for a good 5 minutes this time. Her eyes had returned instead of the gaping holes, but she still lacked any other facial features and started crying. The static slowly grew louder and drowned out the sound of her cries. The scene cut to black with the loud static. When the screen returned, Ruby was sitting on a bench in the garden by 2 gravestones. One was labeled R.I.P. Mommy and Daddy, and the other R.I.P. Brother. She then started to look down at the camera with glowing blue pupils and spoke to me, or whoever was watching. This is because you never watched any of my brother's episodes, so one of these days, you will regret this. The screen faded to black afterward. At this point, I had already been sick and was sitting there shaken. The episode seemed to have finally come to an end as the Max and Ruby theme slowly played. I was about to eject the DVD when the same image came up like it did on the TV. This time, however, there was text above the two rabbits that said, "Death is our only release." There were no credits or anything else. It stayed on the screen for a few seconds before the DVD finally popped out of my laptop. I sat there trying to understand what had happened. In my shock and fear, I made the stupid decision to break the DVD as much as I could before leaving the house to shove the pieces down the drain. Thankfully, I kept a few screenshots and saved them on my laptop. The next couple of days passed without anything unusual happening. I had a few nightmares about the DVD, but luckily, that was all. My cousin had gone back home with the rest of the family. It was late at night, and my parents had gone out for dinner, leaving me to watch TV. I heard what sounded like someone posting something through the door. At this point, the DVD had left my mind since I hadn't told anyone about it. However, it all came flooding back when I looked down at the letter in front of me. It was neatly folded and read, "Death is our only release."